Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by All Voices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. Hello and welcome to HR Voices. I'm your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm here with Chad Thompson, the Chief People Officer at LanzaTech. Chad, thank you so much for being here on a Friday.
It's nice to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you because I think that the scenario that we have ready for today is one that I think is going to be very relevant for a lot of folks. Talk to a lot of folks of my own friends in HR. I've seen sort of a lot of talk about this on LinkedIn. So I think this scenario is going to be one for us to sort of chat through. So are you ready for me to read it out and dive in?
I am. Let's go.
Okay. So we're calling this scenario the broken confidentiality promise. During a team meeting, a manager shares that an employee is on a performance improvement plan, intending it as context for project reassignments. The employee learns of the disclosure and files a formal complaint, arguing the PIP is confidential HR information and its disclosure to the team humiliated her and constitutes harassment. The manager argues he disclosed only what was necessary for operational continuity. HR must navigate a complaint against a manager for disclosing an HR process that HR itself designed and managed. It must also assess whether the PIP's visibility has now made it impossible to conduct a fair evaluation of the employee's performance. So, before we dive into some of the specifics of who's involved and all the other mechanics of this, from a high level, what stands out to you as the most risky or the most unclear about this scenario as it's laid out right now?
Well, I do think that, the most important issue is trust and, what is the nature of that disclosure that was made. And I do think that one of the realities of working in corporate America is that very few things are secret. And so we say it's confidential, but I need to read one or two people into it. And those one or two people are not always advised and prefaced with the right, amount of context. And so this could have been a legitimate business reason. For example, I have Rebecca on a project, and last year she really missed on a particular item, or her financial analysis was off and it cost the company $20 million. Is that something that a supervisor should just keep quiet about when this could be a life or death scenario or a major customer issue? And so there could be a legitimate reason why someone would have said, hey, we need to double check her work, or we need to provide some assistance. So context always matters in scenarios like this. But on the employee side, there is an assumption of I have a fair shot to turn this around, and a good PIP would ask the employee what support, what help do they need, and ensuring that that is given, be it a mentor, be it some education, be it some training. So there's a lot going on there that would have to get to the intent, would have to get to the context of what was actually disclosed, what was prefaced around that disclosure. And again, there is a legitimate issue that could be perceived on either side. Most PIPs are reluctantly given in life, and because people feel like it's a finality, but historically and contextually, most employees do well after a PIP because it's a wake-up call, there's intervention, and more instances than not, they turn their performance around, which is what you exactly want. It's kind of hard, though, to be walking around a company or, working in a company where everyone knows that you have, something on against you. And I can see, the context of both sides.
Yeah. I love the way that you said that most PIPs are given reluctantly, just, because no one wants to PIP someone and no one wants to be on a PIP. But when it's used as the tool that it's intended, to your point, it is helpful for development. It can help people to kind of realize, okay, here's my wake up call. Here are the specific things that I need to do. And you can kind of ask yourself, do I want to do this? Do I want to put myself through this? Is this the company that I really want to be at? Is this the job that I really want? It kind of does maybe force some important questions that are important for the employee, for the manager, for the team, and everything like that. I think,
And to your point, it forces that reflection, because if it's a legitimate issue, I remember in my career having, not getting a PIP, but actually having a lower performance rating than I thought was fair. And it really was devastating. And I had a choice to decide, what was I going to do? Was I going to fight it, or was I going to embrace this unfair rating, but recognizing that there were some contributing factors that I was accountable for? So you do the reflection, you focus on what you can control, and then, you pivot, and, that can be done successfully. Obviously, I'm successful, I'm doing well, but we all have these moments of reflection and these moments that we have to rise above. And so in this scenario, you could see where this employee would feel like, well, my future career is impacted because, in some companies, having a demerit or a negative rating is really hard to overcome. You go up for promotions and someone says, well, your last 2 ratings were average, and do we want to promote that person? That is an organizational reality that employees have to deal with as well. And so, a manager could say, well, we're just trying to look out for the company, or trying to ensure that we weren't giving her something that was too challenging. But at the same time, I think if you're empathetic, you could see how hard it would be to, walk around or to work in a context where, something that is negative and is impactful is widely known across the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, especially when you mentioned in the first part of your answer to the question, you mentioned confidentiality and what things really are confidential and what aren't. And I do think that's sometimes a hard part about how employees relate to HR, or where they might lose trust in HR. And I do think that we as HR professionals have the opportunity to kind of maybe communicate some of this a little bit better. But confidentiality can't always be guaranteed, and it's not always part of the process, right? Maybe there's maybe there's different ways that you can state things, but usually information that an employee might think is confidential is usually they consider it confidential because it maybe doesn't paint them in the best light, or it hurts their ego, or there's fear associated with it, right? And I do think that it's important that things are disclosed only as necessary and needed. But when I look at this scenario, I could see this as necessary and needed to an extent, because the manager's looking at project reassignment. So that can mean a lot of different things. We don't have any more information than what is right here, right? So we can speculate. But the reassignment could either have been, it could be taken as the manager basically assuming the person's not going to make the PIP, so they're reassigning them off projects. It could be that they're shuffling projects around so that the person maybe has a lighter project load per the PIP to help them build up some of those skills, right? But either way, I could understand how that person who's affected might have felt unsafe, but also why the team needed that context so that they understand why different projects are now on their plate now. What do you think?
As well as how well was the PIP drafted? Because
Yeah.
if the PIP didn't infer that work was going to be reassigned or responsibilities altered or changed, it could look very rightfully so from the employee's perspective that, that's it's a dishonoring thing. Like, I thought I had a legitimate chance to show you I could deliver this project or this customer or this outcome. And so if you say, no, I want you to work on something lower, well, if that wasn't agreed to, then I can see where the employee is saying, look, you've already made up your mind. However, if it was drafted that, hey, there's an area or two where you don't have the skill or the ability at this time, and we're going to partner you up or assign you some training, and you need to be able to demonstrate that you can put together a proper cost estimate. So we're doing a scenario, we get to make assumptions. This was a big project, this was a cost estimate, and the contract was written that if the company was outside of that, it was, they were not going to be fully indemnified or paid. And so you could see we're in that scenario where I'm making that assumption. Someone would say, for me to be successful, I need to be able to do this. If you reassign me from this, I won't have a chance to succeed, and therefore you have, essentially determined my outcome. And so there's lots of things, but, you get back to confidentiality. So we have a performance management system, most companies do. And the minute your ratings in there is no confidentiality. There's degrees of knowledge about who our top performers are, who our bottom performers are. And that is information that everyone is aware of. And in most companies, bottom performers in a significant category, it is expected for them to be picked. So you could also argue that employees should be a little bit more, kind of knowledgeable about the fact that if you're on a pit, it's going to be known, and there's going to be advice that's coming from legal. And again, many instances, HR is that easy organization to blame. The manager blames, the employee blames, we take a lot of beating if you're in HR, because that's essentially, there's a lot of perception issues about what we do, and that's something that we need to change as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true that we're sort of the scapegoats for a lot of things. I had someone comment on a post that I wrote the other day that compared us to linemen in football. So offensive linemen, I think it was. So, we protect the quarterback, we, stop things from happening. But if the quarterback gets hurt, we're the first ones that are blamed. So we're the most noticed when things don't go well and barely noticed when things are going well, kind of by design. But it does make situations like these kind of complicated because, I think the way this scenario is written that I resent a little bit is that the PIP process is considered an HR process that HR itself designed instead of one that's done in partnership with the manager, with, the people who manage not just the employee itself, but also their work. Like, I think that it's blaming PIPs on just HR in this scenario is, I think, a little cheap and I think a little easy.
Well, it is also symptomatic of the maturity of an organization. In a mature organization, it's understood that we support leaders in executing their job. I don't own PIPs. I don't hire. I don't fire, because I don't come to a leader and say, I just phoned 20 new people and you can have them. Like, there's a business process that determines the need for talent. Equally, there's a process that determines, I don't need the talent. So I'm a facilitator of the business outcomes. And I think part of the issue that we've been struggling with, and we will continue to struggle with, is that HR is that convenient place where when I get into a tizzy or a difficult environment, I can talk about HR. Let me talk to HR. I could talk to you right now, but I don't. So I'm going to use the HR to avoid it. And so HR, in its essence, is set up in a way that takes those blows and blocks and tackles. But we also have this other role that we play. So we have to balance employee advocate as well as business partner. And if we're indexed too heavily in either direction, we lose our value. If we're so business partner that we're not advocating for the employees, then we lose all of our knowledge, we lose all of our know-how of what's going on, because we've lost the trust. But at the same time, if we're advocating too strongly for employees against the business outcomes, then we've also lost our effectiveness. So it's a very thin line that HR needs to, or kind of walk and balance, but it is the role that we have inherently accepted, and good professionals figure out a way to keep those two tensions and keep balance. It's a very hard role. It's a very hard function to operate within.
Yeah, it's true. And it's kind of why I think sometimes, folks they feel like they're born to be in HR, or this is their craft, this is their calling, because sometimes a lot of it can be thankless. But then it can also be incredibly rewarding when you really do find that groove and, you're able to be that effective partner to the business and that employee advocate and kind of find that balance. What I find is so funny is you can find that balance in one organization, and then if you go to a different organization, you have to start completely from scratch. And I think that's the same in, probably every business. Marketing could probably say the same thing. Sales can say the same thing. You move to a different company, you have to learn from scratch. But I find it so funny within HR because it's people. There's just so much more to learn about how people show up to different companies and how they show up to their job every day. And, in this scenario, there's a few people affected, right? Or a few people involved. There's the manager who disclosed the PIP. There's the employee who was PIPed. There's HR who's kind of, dealing with all of this. And then there's also all the other employees who are now aware, sort of I guess they're on the most outside of the circles. So if this was something that was a scenario that was happening that came across your desk, who do you start to talk to first? Like, who do you have conversations with first to kind of figure out what's going on, what's true, what's not true, and what
Yeah.
information are you looking for?
The first thing I would do is talk to the manager because it's clear there was a disclosure of this PIP and, the who, what, why, where, and when, and, those basic questions. Why was it disclosed? What was the context? What instructions did you give? Or you start there because you want to understand. And if he's made a mistake, because you need to assess the business need for the knowledge. And so sometimes you have to determine, to your point earlier, was there a business need for this to be disclosed? And did you balance the PIP as it was drafted with what you disclose and why? And I would test it. Because if the manager is wrong, it could be a scenario where this situation could be recovered by him admitting that, look, I thought there was a legitimate issue, but in the context of your issues that you've raised, I actually realized how I could have compromised you and maybe set you up not for success. And so sometimes that is the right intervention. It's like, look, I messed up here and I apologize, and let's see how we can contain this issue. You then want to go to the employee. You want to try to again see if these stories match, and then figure out, if you can, how it was heard. Because if it's, oh, so and so got a PIP, there are other ramifications. Is this a good leader to work for? And so you can go back and say, look, people, you have some impact here. Like, you had a legitimate reason, but now there's a perception that this on your team, you don't keep things that should be confidential, and it will impact you. No one will want to come and work for you. They don't think they're supported. So you want to do that, and you want to probably ask a few people in the room what they heard, what was said, because if it's raised in a hotline context, you need to be able to at least demonstrate that you took it seriously in our protect the company role and ensure that we get to some assessment and adjudication of what happened here and what's the way forward.
Yeah.
If the employee is thinking that I don't want to be here anymore, there may be a way to settle and find a common ground where there's a release and the employee decides I want to move on and start somewhere else. Or if the apology is given in a way, it might really say, oh, you're human, you can make mistakes too, and I understand the context, and I feel good that what I have to do can still be accomplished. So there's a lot to consider here as you evaluate the situation. And you obviously want to get your general counsel involved, because sometimes this could be going the legal route, and you need to put in your defensive mechanisms as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the kind of the thing that always comes up in these conversations is, when do you turn to legal? When do you involve them? And excuse me, I'm with you. I'm kind of, if I have access to a general counsel or some sort of, especially internal legal partner, I let them know of anything that is even remotely close to some
Yeah.
type of possible brewing scenario, because it's better to loop them in early. It's better to get guidance when you can, especially when the way that this scenario is written, the employee says that she was humiliated and that she believes that constitutes harassment. So whenever the word harassment is used, even when it's not used correctly, you want to just flag it, right? Because you never know what that employee is going to do with that. And I try not to be, one of those people who's paranoid about everybody going to sue everybody all the time, but it is the reality of some of our job in HR. We have to kind of assume any possible worst case scenario
Yep.
and just prepare for it and plan for it. And I think that's also a big reason why the PIP situation is a little bit frustrating, because PIPs are sometimes done to justify firing someone. Sometimes they're done to develop, sometimes they're done to justify firing. And, it's the question that I have that we won't get answers to because this is not a real scenario. But the question that I have is sort of, what is the PIP culture within this organization? Because, she says she's humiliated. It's a blow to anybody's ego to get feedback that you're not doing great, right? That stinks no matter what. But I always wonder, what is the culture of PIPs in the company for someone to react like this? And are they saying it's harassment because they're trying to protect themselves, or are they truly bothered? You know?
And to your point, that is the essence of it. And so again, you'll see a myriad of situations across companies. Some people legitimately believe in it. They're ruthless about it. On the edge, new enroll, we're going to do it. Others are like, I don't want to do it, or whatever. I want to protect myself legally, and that depends on the strength of kind of your legal, employee relations or legal or partner. I look at PIPs as the most genuine attempt to redeem the investment that you made. And so I think when you can step back and say, I went out, I paid an exorbitant amount of money in my search, typically averaging $30,000, $40,000 when you look at time and costs and value. Am I willing to just discard this at the first sign of a challenge? You wouldn't do it with marriage, you wouldn't do it with your kids, you wouldn't do it with most of the things that you're involved with. So if you look at it from, I want to redeem this because I saw potential, what is a reasonable effort that I will make to give this person a fair shot? That's the Nirvana ideal scenario. But you get down to different scenarios. And I like that scenario because that really gets my leaders humane around, if this was you, what would you want? Or how will you do this? And how will you ensure that you give this person the maximum chance to succeed? Because in a culture where many companies have, where we honestly don't tell people the truth. And so this is sometimes the first truth that someone ever gets because, hey, I'm just going to put them as valuable because I don't want to deal with the repercussion of really redeeming them. But if you're on my team, I want you to have the potential to grow and go to somewhere else in the organization. I owe it to you to be honest, direct, and supportive. And I think if you look at PIPs in that context, there's a lot of positive when you look at the statistical data of the success rate as well as the ability to turn it around. But you're right, we will not know, but these are the things that HR practitioners get into. And increasingly, I saw recently this guy boasting about laying off his HR team. It's this perception that sometimes what we do is not valuable until there is an issue. And so it's one of the hardest jobs in my mind. I'm biased because when things work well, the leaders did it. When things don't work well, it's HR's fault. So if you're in this profession, toughen up, thicken up, because that's how it is. And you got to be comfortable with the value you provide and the support you bring to the business.
Love that. I feel like that's the soundbite. Be ready to toughen up, be ready to deal with that because it is true. It is the reality of it. Sometimes it's perception, but this is sort of the fight that we're up against. And I think the part that I have one sort of question to tie up this scenario before we officially wrap up, because believe it or not, we're actually running out of time. But when I look at the ending question of this scenario is, does the PIP's visibility make it impossible to conduct a fair evaluation of the employee's performance? And I actually think that my initial take on this is I actually think that the visibility of the PIP makes it even more possible to conduct a fair evaluation because there's more transparency. There's less like trying to operate in the dark. I think what makes it complicated is the harassment claim because that's going to be, again, that can be something that can be possibly weaponized in different ways. But if we're looking at truly evaluating someone's performance, it's almost like, well, now that we don't have to pretend that it's not happening, maybe we can evaluate it, more fairly. But I'm curious what you think about that.
I love sports analogies to explain HR and life. And so we're going to use a football analogy. You just got benched. You're the quarterback. Everyone's aware of it, right? And so the next man's up. You lost your shot. No, you might have been the starter, but you're just going through a bad patch. And so in sports, you have to deal with your shame publicly. Like the whole city knows, everyone knows. But then you got to look inside and decide, like, what fight do I have to win my position back?
Yeah.
So pips are not about the company only, it's about the employee. And if you've decided that you don't have a fair shot, then you might be, kind of wimping out from the opportunity to rise above adversity. But at the same time, you might also, your team might say, man, I feel badly because we didn't block for him the way we should have, or we didn't tackle or hold the line for him. And I feel a little bit bad. It's like when coaches get fired, sometimes the players say, man, I love this guy and I feel like we let him down. And so there could be that dimension to the team dynamic that says, look, we know X or Y struggled in this area. What am I going to do to help them? And if I care, this is not information that I'm going to be gleefully just giving out
Right.
and perpetuating, but there's a team and we need to help someone on the team, and I'm good at something and they're struggling. Will I help them? So I'm with you. This could definitely turn around. Sometimes you just gotta wait until the quarterback messes up and you get back in.
Yeah.
Sometimes you see good stuff in practice and say, hey, I want to go back to him. I think he's learned his lesson, and we want to ride with him. And I think that's the way that you should look at it. Like, some failures are slightly public, can't hide away, but you have to look internally as the person with the issue. But you also have that expectation as the team and the leader of what can I do. And if the leader fluffed and messed up, and he can own it and say, this wasn't the intent, and here's what I'm going to do to make sure you have a fair shot. It's redeemable. If
Yeah.
the person doesn't want to redeem it, and this is the way out, and that's the risk as well. Some people run to various scenarios because they never sat with the first pip that they had and really dealt with it. You know what's going to happen to them. They're always going to be blaming someone else versus looking in the mirror. So there's a way to look at this in a positive way for both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I feel like we would work very well together because I think we have a similar philosophy on some of this. It's always just refreshing to kind of talk through. Pips don't have to be a bad thing. Like learning out loud is what I call it. That doesn't have
Yeah.
to be a bad thing either. Like, I tried this, I failed at it. I'm going to sit this next thing out because maybe the failure was enough that that's warranted. But now I understand what it is that I have to do better. That's life. We're not all just going to be on an upward trajectory all the time, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
we're going to be great, 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 and then we're going to fall. And then it's not about that. It's about how you come back from it. That's just what everything is in life. So why would work be any different, right?
Exactly. Are you built tough, and can you handle adversity and failure? And can you be honest with yourself? Like anyone, most people, that's the issue. Like, I'm not good at this. I could tell folks, I'm not good at this,
Yeah.
and I need help because I'm not the leader that can do everything. And no, these stuff I struggle with. But if you want ideas, if you want vision, if you want leadership, strategic thinking, that's where you hire me. And I think we got to be honest. Every job has the requirement to do some grungy stuff, but it's life. And I think we build tough, as Ford says, and you work through it. And you'll have runners, and you have people that will sit in the shame and dig their way out and figure, like, yes, I've learned from this, and now I know I'm better. Now I know I'm really good because I overcame adversity. But who you work for and the confidence you have in their desire for your well-being cannot be understated as well. And
Yeah.
that's where leadership really comes in, your brand, your reputation, and your care, because everyone's watching and everyone's making an assessment of, is this the place for me? Look at what they did to A or B, and I don't like it. So that's the risk the company has as well.
Yep. So true. So well said. Because I was just about to ask you about your take on sort of the leadership side. Because, like, you're right. Leaders have to earn someone's willingness to work through the shame, right? It has to kind of go. It's all a team sport. Everything is a team situation and team scenario. We're all going to have our ups and downs, but we also have to see how we're going to grow together or how we're going to fail together. And it's everybody has to participate, but you have to trust the vision of where you're headed. But I have one
It's
final
totally
question for
true.
you before we wrap.
Certainly.
So there are a lot of assumptions out there about HR, and we talked a little bit about some of them, but what my final question is, what's one assumption about HR that you think needs to be challenged?
I, To me, the number one thing I've struggled with all my life is that HR isn't really a strategic function. And so I think we are largely are at fault as HR practitioners for that in terms of how we show up, the level of the business knowledge that we demonstrate, and how we can position our solutions, our communication in the context of the business. And so what I've found in my career is that a lot of what we do, if we're not careful, we follow, we're all doing the same things. And our function is that critical function that has to stop and ask itself why we're doing things, what's the value, and how does this help the business be better. And so sometimes, leaders come in and HRs, we're just talking about our processes. And you need to do this, you need to do that. It's time to do performance. It's time to do, to me, that is not HR. That's a process. Like HR's value, like now when we're facing it with crisis, and that's where you see the HR function gaining in credibility is what are we going to do with this remote work? Do we, what these tough decisions that we have to make, how do we strategically make them? AI, what does this mean, right? We're going to fire all these people and we're going to brag about it. But what if we're wrong? How is our company perceived? Will this be the right place to work in terms of how we treat people? There's so much more value that we can add, particularly to what businesses do than just being the policeman. So I hate HR as the police officer who is just keeping the laws and following the rules and writing tickets. That's not our role. We're really the career whisperer, the coach, the advisor. We're that strategic partner to the business. And we need to demonstrate that stronger and stronger, particularly with the challenges that companies are facing right now.
Love that. So well said. Thank you, Chad. And thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being here and sharing your expertise, your wisdom, and talking through this scenario with me. I could keep on going for a while, but I know we all have days that we have to get back to. So thank you for
I,
this.
I appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, always nervous to come and speak on topics you don't know what you're going to talk about, but this was painless, and I really enjoyed it. So, wishing you well, wishing your program well, and hope that what we shared today inspires others and helps others as they
Like,
work through some of these unique scenarios we face in HR.
yeah,
Thanks.
likewise. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for listening. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.